Welcome back, guys. It's Israel here. And have you guys heard of CI/CD pipelines? If you have worked professionally, at least for a little bit, or in teams, you must have heard about them. It's basically the way that your team's code gets merged together, built, and then deployed to all your different environments. So I want to show you guys how you can create your own pipelines using Azure Pipelines. I'm personally going to be using a .NET API as well as Azure Repo to store my code. And then we're going to be working as well with Azure Web Apps and Azure Devops. So let's first dive into what is Azure Devops and Azure Pipelines, and then I'll show you guys how to actually create them. But before I do that, I just wanted to thank my channel members for making videos like these possible. If you guys also want to support the channel and have your name here, check the link in the description. What I want to do now is explain to you guys more about pipelines, more about Azure DevOps, and all the different tools and technologies we're using within this project when we actually go ahead and create the pipelines that we're going to be doing, because I want you guys to understand the why, not just understand how to do things, because I want you guys to be well informed coming out of this video. So let's step through. So where are Azure Pipelines? Azure Pipelines are a service that are within Azure DevOps. Azure DevOps is used in a lot of different team settings. I've used it at 2 of my previous jobs, including my current job. So Azure DevOps is used in a lot of different places, and it's only growing. Azure DevOps is a SaaS platform from Microsoft that allows you to develop and deploy your software using all of its various services. So as you guys can see here, one of their services is Azure Repo, which we will be using. Azure Pipelines, obviously. Then you have Azure Boards, which is more for planning. Azure Test Plans for testing, obviously. And then Azure Artifacts. The artifacts are what you create when you actually build your code. And then that's actually the thing that you are then deploying to your various environments using your pipelines. So what are Azure Pipelines? It's an Azure service within Azure DevOps, like I just showed you guys, that automatically builds, tests, and deploys code. It supports a ton of major languages, project types, and platforms. And there's 2 ways you can really build your pipelines. They can be done using kind of templates and the visual designer, which is more drag and drop. Or you can do it using YAML, and you can actually write all your YAML code, and it turns kind of into a file that then gets stored into your repo, and you can manage it that way. I chose to go the YAML route because I kind of wanted to have a little bit more of control, and I'll explain it in a second. But you can very well do the visual design side. There are a ton of YouTube videos doing that one. I just kind of didn't like that you don't have full control, and I kind of like going the full control route. And it is what's in charge of pushing your build artifact to wherever you need it to go. And right there is the Azure Pipelines logo. It's a little rocket ship. So what does CI/CD even stand for? We hear this term all the time, but what does it even mean? CI/CD stands for continuous integration and continuous deployment. Continuous integration means that developers in the team push their code to a repo. In our case, it's going to be Azure Git repo, and it continuously merges in the code they push, which then eventually triggers a build, which then runs tests, and then eventually pumps out an artifact, and then eventually that artifact is what we're going to be deploying. And then continuous deployment, because as you push your code, you're going to be triggering builds. These builds are going to be creating new artifacts, and these artifacts will then get pushed out to your different environments, whether that's staging or production. So now we have the CI/CD pipeline diagram that I pulled straight from the Azure Pipeline Microsoft documentation. So it's pretty legit, guys. And I just kind of want to visualize and show you guys everything that I've kind of talked about up until this point, so you guys can kind of see the bigger picture and it's not just text, and you guys can kind of see what I'm talking about. So on the left side right here, you're going to have yourself or me or your full team is going to be right here. You're all going to be pushing to that same repository. And then this next part's going to really depend on who you work for, how your team works, and how many branches you may have, right? So I would say that you might have a PR if this is your staging or your production branch. But if it's just dev that you're pushing to, you probably don't do a PR at this point. But if it was staging or your production, maybe you have a PR that you have to do to just push that code. Then your continuous integration is now you're going to grab all the code that's been pushed in, and you're going to want to merge it. And once you merge that code, you're going to want to actually run some tests, check if you can get a build, and then do all your unit testing, integration testing, and stuff like that. So right here, you can kind of see the steps in your CI, which is you're going to get any secrets that you need for connecting and stuff like that. You're going to restore all your packages, get your project ready. You're going to try and do a build. Then you're going to run all your tests. And if all of that works, then you can successfully build the project. And now you're going to create an artifact. And now that you've created that artifact, we're like, cool, we have a legit build that we were able to create that has no issues. So now we can confidently deploy it. So now we move on to the CD part, which is we're going to go and download our artifact again, and we're going to deploy to staging or deploy it to production. And then, like I said, both of these branches that you could push through, you may need to initiate this push, by using a PR. But necessarily, like for me, if I'm pushing just to my dev branch, the normal branch that then branches off and pushes to staging and production, I probably don't do a PR there. But we're going to kind of see kind of how I like to handle things whenever we get into the actual me creating the pipelines a little later on. But I just wanted to show you guys kind of the flow of this and make it very clear kind of how all of this works. Now we're going to get to the way that I chose to build my pipelines. Like I said, there are two different ones, and I'm going to show you guys in the next two slides what they look like. And it's the visual designer side using DevOps, and then the YAML file, which again is using DevOps, but you're actually creating your YAML code. I chose to use YAML files, like I said, because I want full control, as well as you can use them multiple times and then you can still manage them, and they are very scalable. But it is, again, my preference. Inside your YAML file, you are going to have jobs. A job will then contain steps inside of it, which are kind of the smallest pieces. And honestly, writing YAML isn't really that bad, because there are what are called tasks, which are basically mini templates that then you fill them in and they just kind of automatically fill in the code for a given step of whatever you want to do, whether push to Azure, create a build, restore your NuGet packages. There are little mini templates for that, and we'll see that when we actually create our pipelines. And then for each job, it runs on an agent, which is basically an operating system image. Basically, it's what we want our software to run on. And now let's move on to the different ways you can actually create your pipelines. So here we have what I was calling the visual designer for the Azure pipelines, where Microsoft really gives you this whole UI that's very nice and appealing to use, that is not as confusing maybe to some as having to learn what YAML is. You kind of find your artifacts here, you add your stages, environments, and all of that, and it's kind of easier to set up kind of triggers. You click this little like lightning bolt, and those are your triggers. You can set restrictions, policies, and all that kind of in here, and it's a little bit easier to find. But everything you can do here, you can also do in YAML. And now, a little bit less appealing to look at, but this is kind of what the YAML file looks like. You'll have some parameters or variables. Then, like I said, you'll have a job. Like this job is to do a build. You're gonna have your image of whatever type of operating system you wanna run it on. So right here, it's Windows. And then you're gonna have your different steps. So you're gonna be using NuGet, you're gonna wanna restore your NuGet, build your project, and stuff of that nature. So these are kind of your little steps and tasks within a given job. And then you're gonna have kind of your OS right here. But this is what a YAML file looks like, and this is something like what I'm gonna be using going forward. But again, there are two different ways that you can do it. It's really up to you and what you actually have access to, but both are very proper ways and acceptable for doing your pipelines. But now that I've given you guys all this information, now let's actually go and create these pipelines, and let me show you how to do it when you wanna push your .NET API. Okay guys, now that we are at the project I'm going to be using, just kind of want to walk you through with what I have. It is a .NET 7 API. We can load it here, and you guys see that we'll have some endpoints. The database, what the endpoints do, none of it honestly really matters. I just want to show you guys what we have. The data isn't here. All we want to do is we want to be able to push this and then see the Swagger page on our production environment eventually when we end up pushing it. But I just want to show you guys that we have some endpoints here, as well as we have a unit test project right here, and it only has one unit test that basically is just checking, hey, does this list equal this list? If so, pass it. And I will show you guys down the line whenever we push this project, what happens if we push code with a failure in a unit test, kind of how the pipeline reacts to that. But just want to walk you through, this is the project. We have a .NET API, a unit test project with one test, and this test is going to pass right now, but we will check later on if it were to fail. Now that we have this, let me show you guys the next steps of what we have to do. The next step of what we have to do is you need to go to azure.microsoft.com, go to your DevOps, and you should see an option like this. You want to just start for free or start with GitHub. I suggest start free because we're going to be using Azure repos. We are not going to be using GitHub. Once you have this, you're going to need to now go to a page that looks like this, and you're going to want to create a new project. Since I already created this when I was studying and researching for this video, I'm going to create one that looks very simple, but you can name it whatever you want for your project. I'm going to do Soccer Player API YT because this is for the video. Private is fine. It's whatever you guys need to. We are then also going to be using Git. Let's create this project. Now our project has actually been created. So as you guys can see, we have pipelines right here. We have repos, we have boards, test plans, artifacts, all the stuff that I told you was inside of Azure DevOps are right here, and these are our options. But now let's actually add our code into here. So how do we actually push this code into our Azure repo? Well, as you guys can see, I already have a repository open. Get Kraken will show it a little bit cleaner. We already have an initial repository here, but now we actually need to add in Azure so that we can push it to our Azure repo. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go to Azure DevOps. We're going to name it just Azure. And then we're going to need this URL right here. This one right here. You can just copy it. I'm going to pull and push, and we're just going to add this remote. Once we've added this remote, we can just push, and we're going to create a master branch. So submit it. It should push it up. And now we should see, if we reload here, we should see that all our code was pushed now. So now we have a master branch created with all our code from the API, including our tests and this API right here. And now that we've actually pushed all our code here, we can see that we only have one branch, a master branch. And obviously, we do not want to always just be pushing to a master branch. When it comes to working, for a company, in a team, you always want to have multiple branches. At the place that I work currently, we have a dev branch, which is basically where everyone's kind of coding along, whether they go off onto their own featured branch or not. The dev branch is the one that we are constantly committing and pushing to. Then we have a staging, and then we have a master branch. Staging is where QA hangs out. That's where they're testing everything. Master is where the end users are actually using that application. So we don't always want to be pushing directly to master. You want to go the steps. You want to push and make sure everything in dev builds correctly. And then from dev, you do a PR and you push to staging. And then you do another PR and then you push to master. For this tutorial, I'm going to skip staging because then Azure would get a little bit expensive. But we are going to do the whole process just a little smaller. We're going to do push to dev, do a build, and then we're going to do a PR to master. But just I want you guys to have that diagram in your head, and especially that diagram we talked about earlier in your mind. But now let's go ahead and create another branch here. We want to go ahead and create a dev branch. So we're going to create a dev branch here. We're going to base it off of master because it's the only one we have. And now that I've created my dev branch, it's the exact same as master. I want to set a branch policy for it because whenever I do a pull request, I do not want Azure DevOps to automatically snip it and get rid of it. I also don't want to have to check whenever I do a PR, uncheck a box, which I'll show you guys later which box I'm talking about. I don't ever want it to get rid of dev. I want dev to be a constant. So you're going to need to go into security, and then you're going to go in here into this force push, and you're going to want to set to deny so that it will never force push any of these things. And we'll see later on that the checkbox that we would have to uncheck every single time we do a PR is just kind of glazed over. You can't click on it and you don't ever have to worry about that. But you do have to set this on dev so that whenever you do a PR, DevOps doesn't just snip dev. But it would be nice if you had like a featured branch. That would be okay to just immediately get rid of whenever you do a merge into like dev per se. But now that we have our branches and our code pushed into here, and we can see that we have our two branches here, I'm going to switch to dev because that's what we're going to start with. We now want to go to Azure over here, and we want to create a web app because we want to have our production environment to actually deploy to later on using our pipeline. So now that I've created my two branches, but also set that policy on dev so that it doesn't just get pruned whenever we do a PR, I do want to do one thing, and that's because on master, the way that we want to deploy to master is we want to have to do a pull request. We want to have to do a pull request before we merge our code from dev into master, and we would want, someone to approve that. In a regular team setting, you would have maybe one or two devs have to approve whatever code changes are going into master. It's just a way of making sure that the safest amount of code makes it to the upper echelon of the environments, and you have as little mistakes as possible getting all the way to the end user. So, but in my case, it's just me. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to do the branch policies, and I'm going to require a minimum number of reviewers, and I'm just going to put 1, and then I'm going to allow myself to approve my own changes because if not, we've never proved anything here. But we want to have that just so that we can mimic doing a PR, which is a very common thing that you would do at any workplace, is that when you're pushing to master or staging, you would have to do a pull request and get that accepted before any build is triggered and anything actually happens. So I want to have that very ingrained in this video so I can show that to you guys. But now that we have all of that done when it comes to our branches, let's actually go to Azure and create a web app so that we have a production environment for us to actually push to. So what we're going to have here is we have our Azure subscription already ready to go. We have the demo app that I messed with a day ago, and we have our resource group. First thing we're going to do is just go to Azure Services, and we're going to create a web app. Create this web app. We are going to select the resource group we've already been using. We are now going to do demo soccer player app, YT. We are going to do .NET 7 because that's the API that we've been using. The region's fine. And then I'm going to do, believe, free. So I'm going to do my plan because I want it to be free because I don't want it to get expensive. This does mean I don't have 2 different deployment slots. So I'm just going to have production, which is why I only have 2 branches. But if you wanted to have staging, you could easily scale up what I'm showing you guys in this video. And you would just need to pick a plan that allows you to have, more than just 1 deployment slot. And moving on from here, review and create. And now we create, and I'll be back once this web app is done. So now that our web app has been created, we can see that if we click on this link right here, we see that our web app is just waiting for content. We scroll down here, we can see that where would we have our different deployment slots, but we would need a different plan. So if you did have a different plan, you would be able to add like a staging slot and then you would have your normal 1 slot, which is this one, could be your production or however you would want to structure it. But just keep a note that you're going to have to log in to your Azure to give Azure DevOps access to everything in here. So just keep that in mind so you can, remember your username and password and stuff. But now we can come back here and start actually doing our build pipeline. Okay, so now that we've created our Azure Web App and we have our branches, I want you guys to be aware that I'm now going to switch over to the project that I originally created. So this is going to be the soccer player API, not YT that you guys have been following up until this point. I just want to show you guys because this one's already working and I already have it set up, but I'm still going to walk you through what you have to do from here on out. So first of all, what you're going to want to do is before we go on to these next steps, go to your main. And I know that we said that we were going to do pull requests and set all that up. Please turn this off for right now. So just toggle this one off and don't pay attention to it because we're going to need to push a few things when we're creating our pipelines. And I don't want you guys to have to go back and forth toggling this on and off. So now to actually go ahead and create your new pipeline, what you're going to want to do is click new pipeline. You're going to click right here. This is where our code is, Azure Repo Git. Click your project, and then there's a bunch of different templates here. We're going to want to do a starter pipeline. So we're going to get this default template right here, but we honestly don't need any of it. You can just go ahead and delete it. And be aware that, let's say, once we actually put something in here and you click save and run, this is going to actually do a commit. And it's going to be a commit to your master branch here. It's going to go directly to master. So just be aware that when you push this, it's going to be a direct push to master, which is why I wanted to get rid of the PR thing because we are basically pushing these files into the repo as well. So we need to be able to just push them in. And then once we actually finish the pipelines, then we can actually put the PR request back and set everything up kind of how we had it. But now let me show you guys the code to actually create your build pipeline. So this is actually the code for the build pipeline. I know this seems like a lot right here, but I'm going to walk you guys through exactly what this build pipeline is doing. I'm not going to leave you guys hanging. So as you guys can see on this right side as well, what did I say whenever I was going through kind of the slides is that there were going to be tasks, but they were like mini little templates. So like this .NET Core one, you click it and you're like, oh, well, I want to test my project. I want to run the unit test. Well, if you scroll down here, you're going to see where I am declaring my unit test. So what is this? This is a task that does unit test, and that's the name of it. And then I'm going to say I want to call test, which is this one right here. I'm going to then pass in my configuration to test, which is a variable that I defined up here. And then we are going to then just grab this code, and then this is how it kind of goes, and you just kind of add it. And then it just kind of adds it in right here, as well as we had build configurations in this one. But I just wanted to kind of show you guys how you use the templates to then just add in the code. So you're not really writing all the YAML from scratch. You do have these convenient templates like deploying the Azure, Azure service, which we're going to do in the release pipeline. But let me just walk you through and let me tell you guys which of these templates you kind of have to use as you go along. So first of all, you're going to have at the very top this trigger. Why this trigger? Because whenever we push to dev, so when we actually do kind of a git push here, so when we push the dev, we want to trigger a new build and then run, all these NuGet packages. We want to run our test. We want to build a new artifact, and then we want to publish that artifact. So we want to do all of that whenever we push code up to our dev branch. So with that being said, we write this trigger branches include the dev. This pool VM is basically, like I said earlier, the operating system we're going to be running our software on. I'm then setting some variables in here. None of these are using these tests, so don't worry. I'm setting the build configuration. I'm setting the solution, which this is essentially just the file path to the project. So if you open these up, you're going to see that you have the soccer player API here, CS_proj, which is this one right here, which is the project. You're going to have the solution, which is this one down here. And then you're going to have the test project, which is this one right here. And that's where you have all your variables. So now we're actually getting into the steps. So this is the steps inside the one job that we're going to have because we're only doing one thing. So first of all is we need to do our NuGet installer. So we need to get our NuGet packages installed. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to go over here. You're going to type in NuGet, and then you are going to do this installer right here. And then all you're going to do is you are just going to press add. And then you're just going to get rid of this because you don't need it. And then you can just give it a name. Next up, you're going to restore your NuGet packages. So you're now going to do NuGet. And then you are going to do this NuGet. You are going to select restore right here. Then you're going to need to do the path to your solution. So in our case, it's going to be this solution right here because it is already going to be this one. And then I think that is it. So let me just see. Yes, so that is all you're going to be doing in this one. And then I just gave it a name of restore NuGet. So these names right here basically come up whenever it actually starts going through the pipeline, and you can just kind of see it in English a little bit better, but that's all that is. So now the next step is going to be the unit test, which is what I already showed you guys, which again is just this one. And then you set this to test, and then you're going to give it the path to test. And then you're going to give it this configuration to release. So that goes right here. And then you just add it. And then you're going to have that one right here. And I give it a name of unit test. Now we're going to actually build the artifact. So now for this one, and we're going to build, we now go to this .NET Core. And we're going to set build. We're going to do the path to our project, which is going to be this variable right here, which this project is the path to the soccer player API CS_proj, which, like I said, is going to be this one. And then we are going to, I believe, set an argument of configuration. And then we're going to have our output be the build.artifact staging directory. So that's going to be where it's going. And then we do also want to zip after publish because we want a actual .zip. And then that's all you're going to do here. And we're going to add that in here just so you see it kind of go in. Boom. And then you give it a name. And then you don't want to publish the web project either. So add these in as well. Next up, and finally, we are going to publish that build artifact to a place that we can actually get to it once this actual build pipeline is done. So that then in the release pipeline, we can actually go and retrieve it. So to do that, you are going to do this one. So you're going to do publish build artifacts. You're going to give your artifact a name. In my case, it was soccer player artifact. You are then going to set the build to artifact staging directory. Your location is Azure Pipelines, I believe, yes. And then I don't think you need anything else here. So then you're just going to also add that in there. And then I gave it the name of publish artifact. But once you have all this code, this is what your build pipeline is going to be. And then all you have to do is you're just going to come up here and you're just going to click save and run. You should see something like this that says save. And then it's going to tell you that you want to do a commit directly to the main branch. This is why I said that you should turn off the PR, because if you have PRs on your master branch, it's going to not allow you to do this. So this is just for right now because it wants to commit this YAML file in there. So just be aware of that. Just ignore it for now. And that's why I told you to get rid of the PR. You're just going to do a push here. And it's not going to actually trigger dev because, again, you're pushing to main. So main is going to be ahead of dev. All you're going to have to do is now do a merge from main to dev. And once you do that, your dev branch should actually trigger itself. And if it doesn't for some reason, then you have a problem. But now let me show you when we actually commit the dev branch that we should see this build pipeline already working. So now that we have our build pipeline done, I'm going to go in here and I'm just going to make one change to this API. So I'm going to change get all players to get players. So this is going to be the one change in the API. And now we have, changes in our dev branch. So we want this to run because we've already pushed this and we should have it looking something like this. So if you go to your dev or main, you should have this type of structure. Ignore this pipeline for now, but you should see in your dev and main that you have this file right here. So this is your build pipeline. You should see it in main and dev. And if you don't have it in your dev, just merge your main branch into dev, and you should be able to pull those changes down. And once you do pull them down, it should automatically trigger this. And if you don't want it to do that, comment this out or delete it before you do the merge so that it doesn't automatically build. But you probably want to see if your build pipeline works. And now I'm going to show you this build pipeline working by doing what? Since I made that one change, you should see that one change right here. I'm just going to push it using git kraken, which is my trusty get good, because I do not like using the command line. So we're just going to push this. I'm just going to say update, nothing too crazy. So we're just going to commit and I'm going to push it to dev. So this is this dev branch. So if we go in here, we should now see, if I go to pipeline, we should see that this is now executing. This is the build pipeline right here. And if I look into here, you should see that we are starting to run, and I'll be right back once it finishes executing the build. So as we can see, this is the dev branch right here. So this is the pipeline. And if you don't believe me, we can click edit here and you can see that this is our build pipeline. So going back, we can actually check the results of the changes that we made. So this was the last push that just happened. It just ended as well. We can expand this and we can see actually what happened. And you can see those names that I did whenever we were setting up the little tasks in the little steps. So we have the job. We saw it initialize itself. We checked out. Then we did all the NuGet stuff. We restored it. We restored all our packages. As you can see all right here, all the different packages that we use. Then we ran our unit tests. We can see that we had the one passed unit test because remember, we only had one in this project. Then we are going to build our artifact. And then we want to publish our artifact. And we can see that we are creating one and it is being uploaded to the correct container. And then we are posting it. And then when you look at the final job, up here, we can see that we created one artifact. And if we click here, we're going to see our one created artifact. We're going to see we have the zip file and it is posted in our artifacts. And if we click it, we will actually be able to download it and we'll see that we have all the DLLs in there and everything that we need. So let me just wait for it to download. We can click it and we can see that we have everything for our API in here. So the build and the artifact was created correctly. And now that we have this zip file, this artifact, we can now get ready to do our release pipeline and then push it up to Azure. But there is one thing I want to address, and that is an error that I was running into whenever I was creating my build pipeline. It was this error that said no hosted parallelism has been purchased or granted. If you are doing this for free and you're not working for a company and you're not paying for any of this stuff, you will see this issue when you try and build. And basically, it's, I guess, at some point people abused kind of that Microsoft just allowed people to use this stuff. So now they've gotten more strict on it. You actually have to go and request free parallelism for Azure Pipeline. So you won't actually be able to do your build, or at least I couldn't until I went and requested access. So you have to go fill out a form and then it takes about 2 to 3 days for them to give you this access, which is why it took me longer to make this video. I will put the link to the form in the description if you guys want to apply for this. And I'm sorry in advance. It's not up to me. But now let's move on to the release pipeline. So again, to create your release pipeline, you're not doing anything different. The only thing you're doing now is you're going to go and get that artifact that we already created in the previous build pipeline. And we're just now going to grab it or download it. And then we're going to now push it to Azure Web App. So we're again just going to create a new pipeline, Azure Repos, the API, and then go to the starter pipeline. And once you're here, you can again go ahead and delete this. And I hope you didn't go back and put the PR for the master branch, because again, when you save and run this, it's going to do the exact same thing of it's going to want to commit to the main branch. This will be the last one because it's going to be the last YAML file that we're going to create. And then after that, you can just set it for the rest of development for whatever you're going to do. But just be aware that we are going to have to do this. So I hope you didn't go back and take the PR for the master branch. But go ahead and delete this. And now we're going to actually start filling in our code for what we need for our release pipeline. So as you guys can see, I already have my release pipeline right here. It's already in my main. You guys will have it too. Once you save it and you commit it, it's going to go straight to your master branch. So I suggest maybe don't put this in there until you actually save and commit, have it in there. And then once you're actually ready to do PRs or start pushing stuff, you can go ahead and just manually edit it. If you go to your repo and you just go kind of in here, you can click it and you can actually edit it in here. So if you want to edit it from your dev branch and not in main, you can do that as well. And it's just easier and you don't trigger automatic builds if you need to make like little tweaks. But anyways, going back to the pipeline, we can edit. And let me walk you guys through what I did. It's only really 2 steps. Let me actually give a little space there so it's a little bit easier to read. So at the top, we're again going to have a trigger for main or master in y'all's case. So basically, once we push code, deploy anything to this, it's actually going to trigger this file. But again, if we do it like we talked about before, you will have to do a PR before your code goes from dev to master, or it goes from dev to staging to master. You would have to do PRs there because that's what's done professionally at most companies. I've worked at places that don't do PRs, but I think you should do PRs, especially if you work in big teams. It's just good. It helps, iron out some of those bugs or malpractices in your code that might slip through. The next part here is just also going to be Windows latest. And now we're going to get into the steps. So here we're going to do download build artifacts. So where is that task? So it's going to be download build artifacts. So it's going to be this one right here. We're going to want to set a specific build. You're going to want to scroll down and click your project. So Soccer Player API here. You're going to want to select your build pipeline. So remember what your build pipeline is named, and you can you can change the name up here whenever you're creating it. Just be aware. I just didn't do it. So you would select your build pipeline here. You want to select latest, and then you want to select the artifact name or just type it in like we have it here, the artifact name. So you would want to put that here. And then you want to have the download path. So you would want to have that here. So you would want to have this here. And then you would just put that here. Let me do that so I can just shove this in here. And then this would just be right here. And you'd be probably ready to go. And just make sure that all this stuff is specific and latest. And you have that because you want to make sure that you have the latest build. And now the final thing that we want to do is we want to actually push it to Azure. Right? We want to push it to this demo soccer player app because this is the one that this project is actually pointing to. So it's actually right here. So what we're going to have to do here is we're going to look for Azure deployment. It's not this one. It is Azure Web App. So it's this one. So then you're going to go here and you may have to authorize it to have access to your Azure. So just be aware, there'll be a little button that pops up right here, but you should be able to open this and see your Azure subscriptions. So like it said, again, it tells you to authorize. So you do this little authorization right here. And then it's going to bring up everything else that you can just kind of click through. So once it authorizes you, you now select web app on Windows. You're going to select your web app name. So it would be this one. And then if you have deployment slots, then you would be able to select the one in here. But if you don't, you just do this. And once you get down here, you want to set the path to your artifact. So in our case, it's going to be build artifacts directory / soccer player artifact. And then the wildcard for the zip file in where the artifact is. And then you want to set the deployment method to auto. And then we would just insert that one down here. And then that's all you would have to do for here. So just make sure that, your app is correct and that the path to your artifact is correct as well. And anything other than that, again, just make sure that your artifact name is also correct here. But once you have that, you can now save and run. And once you save and run, depending on if you have this or not, this file may or may not trigger. So if you decide to get rid of this, then it will not trigger. But again, you can save, run, and then you'll already have it in your main branch. So now at this point, you guys should see that you should have 2 pipelines here. So you should have this pipeline that is now the one that actually downloads your build artifact from this pipeline and then pushes to Azure, and then obviously your build pipeline. But this one, like it says, is for main or your master branch, and this one is for dev. So now let me actually show you guys what happens when you push and do a PR from dev to this master branch. And we actually can show you guys what it does, how it downloads, and then pushes to Azure. And I can prove to you guys that we're actually pushing to Azure, right? And if you found this video useful, please drop a like on this video so I can spread to more developers on YouTube. This video took me a long time to make, so I would really appreciate it. And please consider subscribing so you don't miss any of the other amazing content on this channel and that I have planned. But now let's actually do a PR. So to do a PR, we already have this one update on dev. So we already have changes. So what we need to do is now go to pull request. We need to create a new pull request. And because I hope you already went back and did, is if you go back to your branch policies, you should have this set here. And again, remember, if you didn't do it earlier, go to your security and for your dev branch, go and set deny here, because now this is where we do not want our dev branch to get pruned once we do a PR. Maybe, like I said earlier, a featured branch, but not your dev or your main or your staging, right? So you don't want those gone. So now we're going to go back here, actually not here, we're going to do a pull request. New pull request, we have our one change here, just the one change. So go back here, we're just going to call it update, and now we're going to create it. Now I'm going to set it to autocomplete once, someone reviews it, really me. And this is where we see that issue that I just mentioned just a second ago where we said deny. Basically here, if I didn't have that set, we would have to uncheck this so that it didn't, delete dev after merging. But since we already have it set to deny, it's just gone. You can't even check it. It's not even going to do it. So we don't have to worry about it going forward. And it's kind of a thing where you don't always have to do it, right? Because it would be annoying if every PR we would have to do that, right? So set it to autocomplete. And now I'm going to set it to approve. And let's see the pipeline, hear the pipeline sing. So this pipeline actually ran pretty fast and it's actually done. So as we can see here, in our release pipeline, it again checked out the branch, downloaded the artifact, it went and actually found it. If you look right here, it actually went and found it correctly. Then we did the push to Azure. So it did deploy. And if you can see here, it did push and it gave us, actually the URL here of where we pushed it to. And then everything finished. So with that being said, let's now go check Azure. So if you look here, we have the demo soccer player app.azurewebsites.net. And that is what we have right here. So I just went to the Swagger. And this is actually the old one. So I have not refreshed it yet with the new build. So the new build should have just get players correctly. And right? Yes, we should have only get players here. So get players should be the only thing that we show here. And let me refresh this. And now that we've refreshed, we can see that it did indeed deploy correctly to Azure because we now only have get players here. If you guys just saw, it was get all players because that was from a previous build. But now that we've actually taken in this little change right here from this push, and we can see that we've now merged on a PR right up here at the top. If you guys miss it, let me pull. So as we can see, we do have this PR now right here, and it is now merged in, and it was the one update that it was get all players. It was changed to get players. And now once we pushed all of that, we can see that we now have get players pushed up here, and we have no more issues with that. And we were able to do the build in dev, do the release pipeline, and this pipeline was able to actually deploy to Azure. And I did promise you guys one more thing, that I would show you guys unit testing failing and what would happen in the dev branch. So before going, let's actually do that. So I'm going to go back to the project. Okay, so how am I going to make this test fail? Well, to prove it to you guys, I'm just going to add in this one list. So right here, we're basically just comparing, are these the same people? Well, now I'm just going to put this here, as you can see. So now we're comparing 3 to 1, so they're not going to be the same. And to prove it, we can just run this test really fast. Run. And it's already failed. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to push this to dev. And I just want to show you guys how the pipeline reacts. So push this, failure, and let's push this, check it in, and now push. And we're going to see what the branch does. So going back to the pipeline, I'll be back when it fails at the unit test. Okay guys, so now we're back. So it just finished, and as you guys can see, it failed at the unit test. It failed the one thing. So what it does is once it fails at the unit test, it'll let you know, it'll send you an email that you failed a unit test. But also what it does is it doesn't actually create a new build artifact. With that being said, if someone were to do a pull request at some point for something else, or who knows what would happen, you wouldn't have a failure build, right? You wouldn't want to have a build published that is a failure that doesn't have unit tests that pass. So this is a good way of just avoiding that. And it's going to let you know that a unit test failed. And you can be like, oh crap, let me go check that unit test, right? So just wanted to show you guys kind of what happens when it fails a unit test. And that was just a little bonus I wanted to throw in after doing all the pipeline stuff. But with that being said, guys, that is how you actually use Azure DevOps and create your Azure pipelines, your build pipeline, your release pipeline, and you set up continuous integration and continuous deployment with your .NET API and pushing out to Azure and having all of that jazz set up. So now that you know how to create your pipelines for your projects, well, if you actually want to have a fully functioning project to maybe deploy, check out this video right here on how you can create an Angular .NET application right now.